I'm always looking for new people to interview and to talk to discuss hard subjects. I never got an answer back from the person that requested to be part of this conversation, but
That's okay.
so I got exclusive rights over Leo Winegar today, so I appreciate that.
No, no problem.
And I'm going to put this on YouTube on my channel. It's Latter-day Saint on Fire. And I've asked Leo Weingart to actually, what I did was what would you say, struggling just because it's weighs on my mind a lot about the way that the black race was treated in our church so long ago. And it always weighs heavy on my mind all the time, considering that my experiences have both sides, which is being in a family that would use racial slurs and things like that, and also being my ancestor being Elijah Abel, and having black relatives even today. Also with the being a Chickasaw Indian, and being the massacre of the Trail of Tears, being a Latter-day Saint or Mormon, been ridiculed and beaten down history. So I felt both sides of this, and so me and Leo, I was typing on Facebook, and one of the groups that Leo has is say it, Leo.
Our Facebook group is called Uplift Community of Faith.
There you go. And so Leo was willing to have this discussion with me today because it's a vital discussion. If we don't say it, if we don't use the right words and have the Spirit with us to express ourselves in the best way, when we're having discussions with others that maybe not of our faith, maybe they translate it in the wrong way. So I wanted to make sure that I did a video that really uncovers what somebody who follows the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints feels about those situations today, and not what was happening 150 years ago, or even some words were used all the way up to the 70s and even after that. So we want to make sure that what we feel, and not worry about what our history looks like. But and I think Leo's just like I returned to the church many years ago. Leo had to take a look at many obstacles in his life, and I'd like to hear from Leo a little bit now and let him give us a little background on his story. He's only told it 1,000 times, but I've told it 10,000 times. So
yeah. Oh man, I'm tired of telling my story. What are we doing here? I'm just joking.
Just a little bit of background.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to tell it. It's that's what happens when you start to tell a story that's, I guess, it's not very normal, I would say, my story. So people like to hear it. That's okay. But yeah, just a quick recap. And of course, if people watch this and want to get a better, more comprehensive view, you can find, I've got an article on LDS living that I wrote a couple of years ago that outlines it pretty clearly what happened. But essentially, I was in my early 30s, and our first baby was just born, and I started learning about polygamy for the first time, and Joseph Smith's plural marriages, to be exact. And it troubled me. I basically went down the rabbit holes, what they say, with regards to faith crisis, and started to research troubling issues. And for a time I would say an agnostic, atheist. didn't really know if I could believe in God anymore. I struggled with, of course, the church because of what I'd learned about Joseph Smith. And so I went through this faith crisis and was continued to go to church and go through the motions with my wife. And then one day out of the blue, I heard a voice. I was in our Provo townhouse with my wife and our baby, and I heard a voice that said, "Contact Stephen Harper." It was just clear as day. It pierced my soul, and I also think it was audible. It was that powerful of a voice. It was the still small voice of the Holy Spirit that I felt like actually spoke to me. It was very, very clear. And so I was in a really dark place. So I was kind of skeptical of it at the time, but I did act in faith, and I reached out to Stephen Harper. Stephen C. Harper is a managing historian on the Saints volumes. He's a church history professor at BYU, and just an incredible person, a brilliant person, scholar, and just kind and humble. Everything you'd want to have in a friend is Stephen C. Harper. So I emailed him my concerns, and he wrote me back. And the short story is he encouraged me to re-examine my assumptions that I was making, my new assumptions, and try to give it some more thought and some more study, and also encourage me to pray and to hold on to some of those experiences that I've had growing up in the church and on my mission and so on, some very powerful spiritual experiences, to try to hold on to those as something that's meaningful. And so I did. I started to pray, and I slowly started to find answers to my questions about Joseph and other questions along the way. As I was reconstructing my beliefs, coming back into full faith in the church, I found other issues that sometimes troubled me, and I had to keep studying. And so I've been studying now all this stuff for a long time, for 10 years, more than 10 years now. So I'm not a historian. I've thought about going back, and I've got an MBA, but I don't have a PhD in history or anything. So
Hold on. I got to ask a question. What is MBA? I have no college
and master's in
background at all.
business.
What's that?
Masters of Business Administration.
Okay, that fits well into history. So
yeah. No, it's not nothing to do with history, of course, but I'd love to continue to get higher education, but it's just hard with with work and with kids and all that. So I don't. But yeah, I've been studying apologetics, criticisms of the church for a long time now, because I'm curious. And after that, I caught the curiosity bug with Joseph's plural marriage. I've since continued to be curious and keep researching. Growing up, I thought church history was boring. like pretty much every kid in the church thinks that, it's like for the old people in the church to study their genealogy, and it's like, what, it's so boring. And until it became salacious and controversial, I just didn't have any interest in it but now I've been reading quite a bit, and I still watch a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of debates and things, and I just love learning about church stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that one of the things that I think captured you, especially when you have a life-changing event such as I did, and you don't turn away from that. And I think that was a life-changing event when that still small voice spoke to you and said,
Yeah.
contact Stephen Harper. And when those things happen to you, and it dynamically changes your understanding of the most significant part of our existence is whether there's a God or not. And we have to, once we come to a position where we can say, yeah, absolutely, there is a God. Now, what do you do? How do you move forward in that mindset now? And you got to, the name God, or the reality of God, brings you to your knees. Now you start to pray, and you start to ask the questions that you need to, so that you can assure yourself that you're going to. And I think what I'm saying, I don't think that's for everybody. I think a lot of people, they believe in a God, but some people, because of that life-changing event, it brings us to our knees and says, now what do you want from us? What do you want from me as a person? And again, he was caught up in Leo was caught up in the polygamy and different aspects of that troubled him, and that really. So if it's okay, God, you say it's real. The story of Joseph Smith and all these things are real. I want to know why. Why was it necessary for the different things in our history to take place that challenges us still today?
Mhm.
Is that clear? Or
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Like, so for us in our church, especially, like if you're a Protestant growing up in a non-denominational church, and a pastor does something that rubs you the wrong way, steals money or something, you can just hop churches.
yeah,
You can not go to church and just stick to the Bible for a while, maybe start a small study group or something. Not to say that that's not valuable or whatever. I'm not trying to diminish the value that people find in other churches. I'm just saying our church, it's like it's do or die. I mean, we make covenants. We 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 are a covenant keeping people. Make promises, sacred promises in front of angels and people that you love, your parents, um, your ward family. I mean, when I went through the temple and made covenants, I was surrounded by people that I had loved and trusted for my whole life, and so this is what we'd call a high demand religion. I would say I think it's a fair
yeah,
category for our church. It's a high ritual, high, investment of time and talents and everything that we're asked to give. So when our connection to God is through this very demanding religion, many people who begin to break that tie with the church struggle with an anthropomorphic God, as Joseph Smith claimed to see. And they may turn to Buddhism or other forms of religion, but it's kind of like it kind of ruins you. For so many people, it's hard for them to believe in anything, maybe a higher power, possibly. They become more agnostic. Most people that seem to just not really believe anymore, and because they deconstruct the authority and the structure of this church, right? This that was so ingrained in part of their life. They deconstruct that. They keep deconstructing and go down and look at the Bible critically. Like, well, the New Testament has some problems, so New Testament's fiction, and so on, and
right.
it just keeps going. And so, luckily, it stopped for me. I didn't really have a community to rely on. I was nervous to tell people. I told my stake president, but that didn't really work out very well. I didn't know anybody in my life who had studied the things that I'd studied, and so I didn't really know what to turn. And so I was kind of in a place of despondency, and so I really needed a place to go. And but gratefully, I found one person that I knew would be honest with me, and he was just a tremendous minister, Brother Harper, my lifelong and eternal friend. Love him forever. So yeah, I mean that's kind of how it goes for people. But I know we're here to talk about a
Yeah.
particular topic, right? The blacks from
Well,
the priesthood, right?
yeah, and I don't want to take up your time, but I wanted to mention one
Sure.
thing that
Yeah.
you expressed, this family idea. And I did a video earlier, about 6 months ago or 8 months ago. It's called I can't remember exactly what I named it, but it's the let me get it out of my head. It's in the days of kings and queens, there was an arrangement. Yeah, it's marriage arrangement to God. Because
Yeah.
when we have children in the church, we already have them on a path that uh, uh, almost in some ways Some of them voluntarily, but a lot of times it's forced on them to be baptized into the church and take on them the covenants. And then there's a lot of pressure of going on a mission or going to the temple or and things like that. And that level of commitment creates a marriage type of situation.
Mhm.
So and when you find out about the things that about God or about the church that doesn't that makes you feel uneasy, the only way to deal with that is to either walk away from it, but you never walk away from it in an easy way. It's always you're going to tear down the spouse that that you have that was once a part of your life, so that you can cope with those situations that come up. And that's the same thing with the church. The church bound you to something that you eventually thought in your mind that was evil. And now all you can do is tear it down, because that's the natural recourse of trying to stay somewhat above the water, where every day you feel like you're gasping for breath to find out, is this the right choice, or was I too? It's kind of complicated in that way, and that's why the family thing is so that triggered that thought, because we are family, and it's a strong family, and when we break away from that family, it takes everything that you have to remove yourself from that society in order to stay somewhat normal in life and not feel depressed all the time.
Yeah, we talk about faith crisis as much bigger in our group and Uplift. It's called Uplift Community of Faith. It's a volunteer organization for those that watch this, and please join. It's not, we don't charge anything. We everything we do is for free, and we do it because we love people. But basically, we call a faith crisis an identity crisis, because it goes down to your very core. Like, if you don't believe in the church anymore, then your identity as a child of God can be in question. Your identity in your neighborhood is in question. Identity as a sealing partner, is in question. You're sealed to a spouse and you no longer believe. That part of your identity is suddenly falters, and goes on and on. I mean, parents, are estranged from children. It's just your identity and everything you've built up as a Mormon. That's why people continue to say, I may not be LDS anymore, but I still hold on to my Mormon heritage and so on. Say my Mormonism, I'm still a cultural Mormon or whatever. And it's because they're just so ingrained, like the word of wisdom, donating 10% of our money, of our income to something good. All these things are just so ingrained, taught from our youth as we raised in the church, that you have to kind of we can't just let go of all that identity all at once. It's too painful and too scary for people. So they hold on to the good things they feel like they were taught in Mormonism. Say Mormonism. I call it restored gospel, but that's what critics call it. So and scholars too say Mormonism. But anyway,
I call it LDS theology.
LDS, yeah. LDS theology is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
The restored gospel.
Yeah, and I think on that note, I'm going to ask that we now get into our subject about the blacks and the racism that occurred back in the 1800s and all the way through, and let's see if we can come up with an explanation on our part of how we feel about it, because I'm sure that Leo battles it quite often too, not just because you feel so close to it, meaning that at least for myself, I want to speak for myself. I'm so close to the problem that it's around me all the time. And because I care about my brothers and sisters, whoever they are, I am no respecter of persons,
Mhm.
black, white, whatever that looks like. That my love for people is just because they are God's children. And so when I think about the atrocities, and we have the movie Sound of Freedom. I don't know if you've watched that yet, but I plan on going. I think it talks about child trafficking. And if Leo hasn't heard about it, he's going to have to get online and look for that.
I've heard all about it.
Okay.
I don't really watch movies, so I'm not sure if I'll see it.
Okay. That's fair enough.
I've heard all about it, both the pros and the cons.
I will leave it to that. But what I'm saying is when we hear about enslavement and bigotry and racism and not only that, now the child trafficking it's not a part of our culture, it never has been, but racism and has been a part of our culture, and so we have to deal with it. And that's a real thing, and it's a hard thing to deal with, and it didn't. It didn't just show up one day, and it just didn't die one day. It came about over time, as far as I can assure. There was, as far as the priesthood ban, and but Leo, do you have any thoughts, or have you
Yeah,
how much study have you done on the subject? Because I don't want to say
sure.
something right now that you are not familiar with. And if I do, and you say I'm not familiar with, and then we'll just go ahead and go on to the next subject on that situation.
No, if you're wanting to like quote scriptures, we can do that. I don't have them handy, but I'm aware of the main ones. We can look at the Book of Mormon, for example. But I think to set the stage, it'd be good for us to talk about the history of humanity quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
Because from the earliest recorded history that we have, there are ideas of among humans that there are this tribalism, that we have this ingrained within us from the earliest days of history, that my tribe is better than your tribe, or
Yeah.
my tribe is separate from yours, and I may attack your tribe physically,
Yeah.
cause harm. And so, going back to like the Roman Empire, all the way back, you've got all these warring, communities. And that is, I think, where a lot of this us versus them mentality, which racism stems from, this tribalism comes from. And unfortunately, I think, even in the Old Testament, we see evidence of this us versus them, where we see, the people of God's people, the people of Israel, saying that God has killed this whole group of people, or commanded us to commit genocide, that sort of thing. And I think there is some, we need to think about that, like human nature, and also how does God see people? That's kind of where we need to go, I think, with the conversation is, does God see skin color? How does he see skin color? Does he see it as just another characteristic of human bodies? Or would he potentially use a skin color to curse somebody because he thinks that some skin color is less than other skin color?
Right.
And we have to kind of go back and say, well, sometimes I think humans, even God's people, have attributed some type of bigotry or some type of hatred, or us versus them, to a particular, some kind of calamitous event. They kind of peg it onto God and say, well, God says this. God said this for us to do this, to commit genocide or whatever it is, or to act poorly in the, like the Old Testament, we have some poor behavior there that may have been, said, well, God said to do this, or God's okay with this because we're God's people, and so on. So I think that's kind of where it all stems from. And then, and unfortunately, racism continued on, or is us versus them, for thousands of years, and was still with us, and it's even still with us today. There are active members of the church who still look down on people of different skin color.
And
So,
That's
or even on their own skin color.
yeah,
There are people that,
Well,
that are reverse racists or whatever.
I wanted to interject and then kind of follow up with what you're saying there. One of the things that I realized a year ago or whatever that we will always look to support those who are family members. Let's say you have a child that plays a sport.
Mhm.
You're rooting for that team, but you're really rooting for your son because you want him to, or your daughter, because you want, because when their greatness established your greatness as a father or a mother. And those who we identify the most, those who we want to champion the most, I believe I've got through that. If you talk to my son, I was always, I would never, what would you say, try to, because I coached him for ever since he was a child, but always did it so that I tried to make sure that everybody felt special on the team. And
Yeah.
and he probably resented that idea, but
You
yeah.
tried to both teams to feel special, or were you saying just
Well, my team, because I coached my team, I had to root for my team,
right?
but I did it in such a way that I was always I taught my teams that we win with respect and lose with dignity.
Yeah.
And because we never, we want to make sure that the other team felt as empowered by the game as you did as a winner, and if that's at all possible. But the point is those who we identify first with are going to be those who we want to catapult on the stage. And I think in my own lifetime, the kind of surroundings that I surrounded myself with, I was ditching school and playing basketball in the church a lot of times in my high school days, and then my bishop had to tell me, "Hey, you're breaking and entering." It's so because I would stay there till from 11 or 12 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. But that was my situation. But I didn't do it anymore after the bishop told me. But but I was playing basketball, and in my community there's a lot of the black community in school with me and things like that, and we got along really good, and I found favor in them a lot of times. I never thought any resentment. I mean, I had situations where I was protected by friends of mine who happened to be black against those who would want to try to you know fight me, and I didn't want to fight most of the time. Well, anyway, but what I'm saying that these were my friends. These were people that were willing to protect me, and I'm always willing to protect them. So there's always that connection with them in that way. And even whenever I went to, and I still want to go back, but the all black Baptist Bible study that I was going to for a while, we fell in love with each other, and I even met some of the parents there, the children that I went to school with, and so that was kind of a unique a wow for me. And so I've and my music is the blues or the old black gospel music that I just love. I just love that kind of that music, and so I've always felt attached to the community, even though my my appearance is quite light in that way. But I never after I grew up and I understood my my association with them, I didn't in myself, I don't think I ever, after that realization, thought of them as being any less, just different.
Yeah, that's an enlightened view that you've had. That comes from education, in part, I would say just, being aware of our history a little bit and educating ourselves can help us to be aware of any, internal prejudice that maybe that we're possibly born with. It's just something that we have to be aware of and then consciously address it in our lives and root it out. It is evil, and it's something that's just carried with us from the beginning of time. Is recorded history, the us versus them, and so.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying is actually the idea goes back even to Cain, I believe. I'm going to say that it goes back to Cain, who
There you go.
Was saying, "Hey, they're going to try to murder me." He was an outcast, and then there's some people that say that he was cursed with a black mark, and we don't know. We weren't there. We just know that something happened, that he was identified special, so that he was not. He was protected from those who would want to end his life. So there was something significant. We don't know what that is, and we try not to impose our ideas on Scripture. And I was having this back and forth with a gentleman who's not a member of the church, but he is a black man, and he pointed out to me that the curse of Cain wasn't the mark on him; that was to protect him. But it was the fact that he would have to suffer because of the earth and what the earth would not yield to him. So, I mean, I brought up this scripture right now, and behold, thou hast, and this is Genesis 4, starting with 13. It says, "And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from the face of and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." I mean, that shows that God loved this child, even though he had created him, acted in the worst of ways.
Yeah.
But he's not hating on him. He's loving him. He's like, look, I'm going to have to deal with you. There's a consequence to your action, but I love you enough that I'm going to set you up so that you're going to be protected. And the Lord said, set a mark upon Cain, lest any man finding him should kill him. So again, we don't know what that mark looked like, but I always, but again, even when I was, going to churches way back before I joined the church, there was this talk about the curse of Cain and how that's where the black man came from. Or, then you have the atheists back then. I'm 58 now, so I was going to school in the 70s and 80s. There was talk about blacks being the product of evolution, and they were closer to the evolved ape than a white man was. So there was a lot of things that were being said at the time that were completely wrong, and it should be corrected. And I think because of the fact that we are good people in this church, I think we are the avenue which we are correcting a lot of this things that were wrong in society.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of like a cell membrane, I would say, the church in the world. Like there's a lot of things that pass in between, back and forth. It's like you've got culture that impacts us as members. Like we always call it the world as like this evil thing, but there's a lot of good things, good influences in the world, quote unquote, the world that can influence us. And I think that the Enlightenment that came from like Martin Luther King and a lot of the other movers and shakers in the 20th century, I think are part of this revelation that can come through a lot of good sources. And so like the church leaders, they were influenced by, intelligent and faithful church members, and also outside of the church. I've got Edward Kimball's article up here on my screen.
Yeah,
We can
please,
refer to that a
please.
little bit during our conversation. But there is this like give and take, and there's this, we always like growing up in the church. We're taught this, we shouldn't be, but I was taught this, so I understand where this is coming from because it personally affected me. But this idea that prophets are like in an ivory tower, and they get, lightning strikes revelation that completely, is novel and is like revolutionary, and it's going to change the world. And that there's really no like homework necessary, like they're not needing to talk to scholars outside of the church or do research. I don't know where this idea really comes from, because Joseph Smith was kind of the antithesis of that. Like he was a sponge absorbing good information from everywhere. But at some point we kind of got this idea that prophets are like it's like a one-way street, where prophets are getting all this direction, very clear direction from the Savior. Like he's like visiting the temple, and like the prophets are like, oh, I didn't know that. Sorry, I'm going to make a change right now and change the church. But it's not how it is. And the brethren, they meet with really smart people and have like presentations, like hours of presentations given to them on current events in the world, and the best scholarship is presented to them, and so they can take that and kind of weigh and think about it and discuss it. And it's part of the revelation process. And so we have to get away from this idea that like, and this is what our critics are still doing. They're like, how could the church leaders get this wrong? And the blacks in the priesthood. How could Brigham Young say such racist things? And like they leave it like hanging, like Brigham Young couldn't have been a prophet if he'd said this. But that's not true. Like prophets can be racist.
Look at the situation. Look at the situation with when the master was sitting right there with the apostles, and they were stumped by everything he said. They had no clue of what he was saying to them. Even though, and then he had to go back and explain things even clear things up for them. So sometimes when one receives revelation, especially people at the apostles and prophets, it's not a dictation like he's uttering every single word. He's given us and I experienced many things in my life that are just outside of and I don't know if I told Leo, or I think I did. Whenever I have a prophetic dream, and I know it's a prophetic dream, somebody dies in my family, and it's happened several times, and I'll tell those stories. If you want to hear my stories, I'll tell them. But I'm just saying, for what I've experienced, and because of those experiences, I can understand how an apostle or a prophet could receive something, some kind of vision or something like that, and totally misinterpret the meaning of that. Luckily for Peter, he receives this vision because there was racism within the church during the New Testament times, especially, where the Gentiles were being told that you have to be circumcised in order to be saved. And then Peter's not on board yet to proselyte to the Gentiles because they're unclean. And then you have this event where Peter's shown this blanket that's full of meat that is from all the unclean animals, and the Lord says, "Whatever I have made clean, it is good for thee to eat." And the people that those who I clean, they're also good for us to be a part of. And I think there's we as Latter-day Saints, we have to if you're struggling with this question about the racism within the church, it's not a new thing. It's always happened, and it's something that we have to battle all the time, and we have to be able to explain it in such a way that we know that the church is true. People, well, yeah, to each of their own, And go ahead,
Yeah.
Leo. I'm sure you
No, I was going to
build
say
on that.
that's well said. It's I think we need to understand, and I need to state clearly that prophets do get intervention, divine, where like God intervenes and he does uh, change the course of the church in miraculous ways. And that does happen. Um, but it doesn't seem to be something that happens like daily or weekly or monthly or even yearly, like where it's like God says, no, this is wrong, you need to change it. It is a slow drip, I would say, like more and more light over time that prophets receive. And prophets in the ancient times, the ancient days, like I think in Book of Mormon times, prophets may have attributed certain things to God, and because of the way that they were brought up, maybe because of some animosity they had towards, the Lamanites, for example, and they may have said, well, because like this is just going into the Book of Mormon now for a little bit, but basically because Laman and Lemuel, because maybe they intermingled with some of the natives that were already in the Americas when Lehi and his family crossed the ocean. There could have been some brown skin that was brought into their lineage, and Nephi and the Nephites could have maybe seen that changing skin color and said, "Oh, that's a curse from God."
Yeah, and
That it's not that Nephi was an evil person or whatever. It's just he was operating with relatively limited light. And prophets don't see everything, even though we like want to think that they do. We think, like Abraham, Moses, these guys that we have information on, like what they saw. They saw the inhabitants of the world, and like you hear these stories about prophets seeing Christ, and like we want to have this like grandiose view of prophets. They're like they know everything, and my testimony is that they don't know
yeah.
everything. Christ knows everything, and he's giving.
Actually, Christ doesn't even know when he's coming back. So that's,
Christ doesn't know.
So even he admits his,
Well, that's a good point.
I mean, even
Okay.
and I think there's, if he doesn't know
The
that
Father
particular
knows.
thing, then how can a prophet how can we expect a prophet to know that, again, when he's communicating with man, he's doing it through the eyes of, uh, through our eyes and what we are seeing at the time. But
Yes.
we're trying to interject our humanity on that all the time, so that and trying to uh, condition our minds and trying to just figure it out. I have a story. I mean, it's an incredible story. Um, it and it I we were moving to Utah about 8 years ago or 7 years ago, and we were on a fast track going, and the while I was watching, Larry Gelwix, who was the mission president here in Fresno, California, he was talking, and all of a sudden the Spirit prompted me to say, "You're not moving to Utah." I just used it as a way for you to start paying off your bills and stuff like that, because you're getting out of hand. At least that was the thought in my head. I'm like, okay. And then my wife is sitting there with my children, and so we get out of state conference, and we we get in the car, and I explained to my wife that that's what was put into my mind. She threw a fit, and she didn't like it at all. And then about 3 weeks later, we were on our way back from Monterey in California, and she says, "I got something to tell you." And I hate when women do that to you. I got something to tell you. But she says, "We're not moving to Utah." And I said, "Okay." And she says she had something to say more than that, because she said, "Well, don't you want to know why?" Of course, I was curious. I just didn't want her to feel like I was curious, but I was. So she said that she had received visual things one day 3 times in a row, the same visual platform or things in her mind that showed the mountains, the ocean, the family, showed the two boys that we have going on their mission. And now, years later, we know that one of the boys is not going on his mission. But was it, so are we struggling with that? No, I'm not. Maybe my wife is. She had hopes for it, but it wasn't because the Lord was wrong and what he was giving to my wife to be assured about, but it was based on that it's basically testing us. This didn't happen? Are you able to stay the course no matter that it didn't happen as that was given to you? And I think that's what happens in the church. We kind of are tested constantly, because if we're not, then what happens? You have a lot of people that are going to enter. If we didn't have the challenges we did in the church, it would become popular. And one of the things that it says in the Book of Mormon is that when your church becomes popular, it becomes it starts falling away from God. And so I like the fact that we're not very popular. We actually have to fight through this all the time to stay strong.
We're a peculiar people.
Yeah. And we're subjected to. So like I said, I think when we're listening to the prophets and they say one thing and it's not, and it doesn't come to fruition, that's no reason to just walk away from, or it was wrong what they were saying. Doesn't give us should create a yearning in our hearts and our minds that says, I'm going to go find out for myself what's going on. Obviously, this didn't happen, or this happened, and whatever that be. And I know that God loves us all. What is going on? And this church is too good as far as its the way it's structured, the word of wisdom, and the family unit that you have, and just treating your fellow man with honest and dignity, and all the things that we're taught. There's something more to this church than bad ideas that come up once in a while. So he's wanting us, I think, in my perspective, God wants us to come to him when we're feeling challenged and seek after counsel from him, and not try to seek counsel after those who are trying to take something that is good from you and make it evil.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure. I mean, I need to make sure people know, because I'm a very loyal and faithful member of the church, but I think that prophets are trustworthy. I feel like if they share a teaching and share an insight with us, we should take it seriously and try to see where they're coming from. And this analogy of them being on the watchtower and being able to warn us of the enemy that's approaching, and that, these types of things. I think we can have confidence in these ideas that prophets are reliable and trustworthy. And so our default position should always be to trust and to try and to go forward in faith as they've counseled us to do. Of course, there are cases in our past when I think that prophets may have overstepped bounds, may have said things that shouldn't have said. And I think we need to understand too, like there's a professor named Anthony Sweat who talks about this, and I've kind of taken his approach to this, and I've added some of my own commentary on it. But basically, he defines doctrine as different layers, different tiers of doctrine. Like, just to quickly summarize, this is helpful for our listeners, anybody that's watching this, but for me, it's huge. So God's eternal mind and will, that's unchanging, it's eternal. That's the top tier doctrine. That stuff doesn't change because it's God's eternal mind and will. And there are probably just a handful of things we could name in the church that are eternally God's will, mind and will, that never change. I think families being together forever is probably eternal mind and will. Probably baptism by immersion is probably eternal mind and will. And there's a lot of tiers of doctrine below that, where, like, for example, the tier below that would be God's temporary will for the needs of his children at that time. So he may have a doctrine is defined as, if we define it simply as what is being taught, that's doctrine, because that's what doctrine is. It's what's being taught. That's another layer of doctrine of God's temporary teaching for his children at the time. So ancient Israel being taught to do things that are no longer practiced today. Those were temporary teachings, temporary doctrines that were adopted and then fell away because they weren't needed anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you mentioned that. I'm sorry to break you off for a second.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. So the Abrahamic covenant required people to be circumcised, and we are under that same obligation as far as the Abrahamic. We attach ourselves to the Abrahamic covenant, but we're not requiring people to be circumcised. We're just doing it voluntarily most of the time, and you can see that that was supposed to be a law that never went away, but yet it goes away because Jesus Christ said it went away.
Yes. So that was you could say it's like people try to mix practice and doctrine, like, well, just a practice, right? Plural marriage was just a practice, but in the scriptures, it's kind of clear that plural marriage it was taught as a doctrine. It was doctrinal, right? So we have to think about, well, God's eternal mind and will, then temporary, and then you've got some more esoteric doctrines or things that are taught maybe that aren't necessarily God's will, but maybe good for the church. Maybe President Nelson, feels like, based on his, research as a heart surgeon and as a doctor, that there are certain things that he should teach that maybe aren't God's eternal mind and will. And as someone, prophets are entitled to their opinions and can teach things that maybe would be, doctrine, but they're not like God's eternal mind and will. So we have to differentiate between these different layers or tiers of doctrine, and that helps us to be able to understand what's happening here with the priesthood, temple and priesthood ban. I think it was taught as doctrine. This is doctrinal. If you were to travel back in time and ask a Latter-day Saint in 1950, I've got a date here that I'm going to read from this article for us. In 1954, if you were to ask members of the church, is the priesthood ban doctrinal? They'd probably say, yeah, it's a doctrine.
Yeah, I would say they would.
So what would you do in that situation? Well, if you're more enlightened at the time, civil rights activist or something, maybe you would have said, what, this is probably not doctrine. This is not an eternal mind and will. It's being taught. Maybe it's doctrinal in the sense that prophets have felt like this is a good separation to have in the church for a time. But it's not God's eternal mind and will. Otherwise, it wouldn't have changed in 1978. But let me read this real quick.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So I'll quote from, this is Edward Kimball's amazing article about his father, President Kimball. Okay. I think it's father, or is it grandfather? I'm not sure. But anyway, Edward Kimball is the relative of President Kimball. Okay, so he says in 1954, President McKay is said to have appointed a special committee of the 12 to study the issue related to blacks in the priesthood. So 1954, that's 4 years? Yeah, 74, 78. What's my math? Yeah, so 1978. So that's 22 years before the priesthood ban was lifted. Okay, 1954. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So they did this special committee of the 12 to study the issue, study the topic. And then they concluded that the priesthood ban had no clear basis in scripture in 1954, but that the church members were not prepared for change.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me that they were studying this issue. praying over it, but that based on surveys that they'd conducted, the church members didn't want to have the change. They hadn't adopted, had received the further light and knowledge they needed to be ready for that change. So my goodness. So this is not just a one-way street. Prophets dictate everything, demand change on us. Sometimes they change things, and we're grateful for that. But oftentimes the membership of the church has to be like leaven in the bread, has to be like the salt of the earth. We have to be prepared for more, more light knowledge. And so anyway, that's just a really important point. It's like this membrane idea where prophets are receiving revelation, members of the church are receiving revelation. We start EFY. That's a grassroots thing that's now called FSY. It's part of the church structure.
Yeah. And Edward Kimball was the son of Spencer W. Kimball.
There you go.
And it was
I thought so.
Yeah. So again, God looks at the dynamics of his people, and he uses, and he has to, he doesn't have to do anything, but he does it because he loves us enough that he knows that we have to get to a personal point in our understanding of his will, so he can push us to the next level. And in the 1978 revelation that Spencer W. Kimball received, and it was confirmed by all the members of the apostles, that this was to move forward at this time. Mm-hmm. And there's some kind of report that even David O. McKay was begging for this, and it's there's some say that he received this revelation, says, stop asking the question. It'll be in my time. And God has a reason for why he wants people to struggle. And my perception on this situation is that he, in order for us to feel the worst of feelings when we hear such racist overtones or anything like that, or to the point where we want to vomit them out because they taste so bad, that he has to bring us to a point where we're ready for that kind of mindset, that we no longer, that this was never right. We don't want to be right, but it was God's choice to allow it to happen through his church, because it set us up to be a more willing people today to be humbled in his eye for his work to go forward. And you look at how many of societies fall, and it takes about 200 years for societies to fall. And it almost seems to me that he used this time period, that in the end times that he would still have a growing strong force in the gospel. And look at the numbers that are joining the church in the African culture, and in Africa and the South Americans. These are growing exponentially, whereas in the United States and the European countries, we're struggling in that way. Did he make sure that he had an army set and ready to go to battle for the modern day? I'd say he did that purposely in that way. Not that he would want anybody to be racist or to have those or to deny anybody, but the eternal plan that he knows is that in the end, everybody's going to be baptized. Everybody's going to go through the temple. Everybody's going to be sealed to their significant others. It's all going to work out in the end, but he's got to make sure that things continue to measure us here on this earth. And the other point I was thinking about, prophets are being proven all the time on how they will lead God's children back to him. And they have to be released from that string that ties them to God so intimately, so that they can figure things out for themselves. Was my what was my counsel correct in that situation? And God will judge him, and he will let them know at the day of judgment whether they were faithful to what he wanted from them, or were they off track completely, and they need to be reprimanded because of their unfaithfulness to him, but faithfulness more to God. And all the prophets will be dealt with that way.
Yeah, the primary role of a prophet is to preach the gospel, right? To lead us towards Christ. And in that, I think their track record is pretty solid. You know,
Right.
like Brigham Young was huge advocate for Jesus, the Savior. He taught powerfully about Christ and about the gospel, and every prophet after him. You know, Christ is definitely there, part of the messaging. It's just there are other things that do happen where prophets, make mistakes, and we have to be able to say this is the, you know, we say God inspired the priesthood man, for whatever for his divine purpose. I guess that is possible, but
I don't know if no, I wouldn't say he inspired it. No, I wouldn't say that at all.
okay.
But
Yeah.
it's like this. I would venture this way. We have the black race, a part of the human race, who's the children of God. They came from somewhere. Genetically, it was put into us through Adam, that when you lived in a certain environment, that your skin color would match the impact of the environment that you were living in. That's one idea. I don't know if that absolutely true, but the scientists are saying that's true, and there's plenty of people out there in the church community saying that's where the black race came from, and that's okay. And even the Lamanites are said that's kind of a theory there. So obviously, God had an intention for people's skin tone to be different on this earth. So He's already done it, just because He created us, and He created that within us. So
Yeah.
God has created, and I always ask this question to those who reject the church and viciously about it. I say, tell me where the black race came from. Where was it first? Where was it first introduced? When did God actually bring forth the darker skin for people? And they can't answer it. But God did these things, and He did, but He didn't want us to be racist. He just wanted us to learn how to overcome those tendencies in our lives.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it could
I
be,
hope you could follow that one.
I think our skin color, I've been digging into recently quite a bit of adaptation and microevolution, and there's a lot of evidence for like our DNA being pre-programmed with this genetic code that allows our over time for us to adapt to our surroundings, right? Even humans, I feel like we can over time can adapt. Our genetics can adapt over time so that we can handle different situations. So I think there may be, like you said, the science may be showing that our skin color has changed, human skin color has changed, or that is adapted to the environment that they're in. That's, I think, very reasonable. That I think the genetic scientists that are doing the research on this are showing that right now. So
Yeah. But what I'm saying to that, even if that was the case, God still created that design.
That capability, right, in our DNA.
And therefore He created the black race. And I don't think we should be hammered for, we've said some things wrong in our history, but I think, if we can understand that God, I'm going to go back a little bit. Then I'll go forward. We were cursed from day one when humanity was kicked out of the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been cursed for that. And the only way to overcome that curse is through the atonement of Jesus Christ. We could never come back into the presence of Jesus Christ or the Father unless Jesus Christ made us, took that curse away from us. And it has nothing to do with skin color. It has to do with the fact that we have that our parents transgressed the law, and now we have to have a way that transgression can be overcome, and that we've ourselves have transgressed the law mightily in our own lives and our sins. So we have to have a savior. And so when we talk about the curse, or somebody the curse of Cain or whatever, the truth is that the curse of Cain is the vagabond, and the earth will not yield up its of its crop or anything like that. So the mark was something to protect him, but still we have a black race, and we have to come to grips that God actually created that black race for a reason. Like I said, I think it goes back to the idea that he's saying, how much can you accept my children no matter how different they look?
Yep.
And that goes both ways. I don't think it's just it's in European culture, we're of course subject to saying that that we are the cause of grief or harm to the black race, but over in a country where it's in Africa, where black races are prevalent over there, and that's what you have, except for South Africa, but they're warring against each other too. Tribal wars always happen in those societies. So, and then you have the Irish and the English who were at war with each other forever. It seemed like it wasn't about skin tone; it was about their tribalism that they had. And you spoke about that before.
Yeah. Now, racism is a byproduct, I think, of that tribalism that humans, have always fought. It's something we've, embraced, and also we are now fighting tribalism as our world tries to come together. I mean, people still have war and still fight, but I think for those who are educated, we start to see beyond that and try to be one. We're trying as a church to be one.
Right. And like I said, and you look at the Ukraine war right now, that's two countries who are
supposed to love each
light
other.
Light skinned both regions, and you're like, and they're hating on each other. So
yeah, they're supposed to love each other.
So there's again, we as a Latter-day Saint, or at least me as a Latter-day Saint, I definitely see all races as my brothers and sisters, and I have done everything that I can to embrace that society, so that I become more familiar with their things that they have to deal with in their society. Go ahead, Leo. I know that.
No, I was going to say that it's not an easy topic. When we've got to own it as a church, as members, that this happened in our history, and I think God created the conditions for bad things to happen. I don't know necessarily that God, wanted or willed for sin to come into this world. I think He created the conditions where we can have sin and suffering and oppression and prejudice, all the things to happen, so that we can learn from these things. It's just interesting. In the King James Version, the rest of the translations don't say this, but I like the King James. It's cool. But it says that the ground in Genesis 3:17, the ground is cursed for thy sake. So it's like, and the other ones say because of you, the ground is cursed because of you. But I like for thy sake, because it sounds like God's saying it's for your benefit that I'm cursing the ground, because you're going to learn and you're going to grow and struggle. So, I don't know. I think there is some truth to that, where I'm not so much into the camp that God's testing us so much. I think He just wants growth. I think He wants relationships. He wants us to build a relationship with Him, and I think He wants us to grow.
Yeah.
And
Well, does He not prove us?
Yeah, but
And how does he prove us?
not like, not like rats in a maze.
Right. This is not going to a classroom
It's part of
and
the
take.
growth. Then yes, I think
Yeah.
that.
No, it has nothing to do with, that idea of being in a classroom and marking all the answers right or wrong. But but he used the word prove or proven. And I think that's the more positive way of looking at that we don't even know who we are as a human being until we're put under certain stresses in life, and how and those demanding times will either our lesson today was Christ-like poise, and where we can stand in the right mind of God,
Mhm.
or in His presence, even through those stressful times, or do we fall away from that and say that this is just too hard, and therefore I cannot keep my composure at the moment that things are going wrong, and so, like I said, I think we're proven all the time of where we stand at in our relationship, again, with our fellow man or woman, and with our Father in heaven. If that clears it up, but you can bite
Yeah.
back if you need to, and I'll let you go.
Well, I was just going to say that, there's so proving or testing. I think it's help. So just a test out of like just to test, just to see how someone does or see if they pass. Like it's a very loving test, very loving proving that's meant to build us, to strengthen us. It's very important that we tie those things together. Like a teacher that gives you a test because they want you to improve, or want you to learn, or want you to do well, not necessarily just because it's part of their job, like sitting back, like, let's see how they do, or see how they perform or whatever. That's that kind of distant, unfeeling, uncaring, tester is not where Heavenly Father is at. If He does provide us with a test or with a challenge in life, it is all about helping us to become better and to grow. It's so important that we say that, because my kids, if I were to just test them to kind of see how they do just because for my entertainment, is like a distant father, like, no, that's it's almost like evil kind of a test.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in just real quick so we can get the full measure of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What is our ultimate destiny, our exaltation, puts us in a position where we're going to have to manage things there.
Yeah.
And for some who believe that we are going to be allowed to continue to colonize other planets and to bring forth more of God's children on other planets, then it's necessary for us to be proven at this time how we will when we're how we are able to overcome some of the hardest things in our lives, and then therefore, once we understand these things and we understand the eternal plan, then it allows us to manage those things that are given to us there. It's not to whether you're going to heaven or not, or going to the celestial kingdom or not or the celestial. It's about God's plan going forward beyond this earth for you, and how that looks. And that's not, so that's why He's saying, I'm going to prove you herewith, you know, and I think that's because we cannot be judged by the basis of an idea that He has. We actually have to act, whether that act is good or evil, and then we are judged by a righteous God, if in our hearts what that portrayed. And so we have to be put through different stresses in our lives to see where we are in like I said, in that relationship. So I hope that clarifies my meaning of what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I was going to say, if we can wrap up here in a little bit, I could get going, but I was going to say I could share something that would maybe help a few listeners if someone is looking for some more help on the fallibility of prophets and they can make mistakes. Do we want to mention anything else about the Book of Mormon verses, like that potentially that the prophets in the Book of Mormon could have maybe seen a change in skin color as a curse, but when it reality was just happened. Like instead of saying skin color is a synonym of countenance or righteousness, like there's that apologetic piece that some of the people at fair and so on are trying to argue that the any reference to skin color in the Book of Mormon is only meant about to distinguish from righteousness versus unrighteousness or countenance. I don't know if that's something we want to mention, but
it's hard to, it's again, as a human being, we're as an honest human being, we're trying to navigate through this difficult subject because it's just that hard. And we don't, for me, I'm not worried about about somebody not staying in the church. I'm not worried about people wanting to join the church. I mean, in my view, it's a lot easier to be with God alone when there's nobody around. So I'm very particular about, this. So I don't want people to join the church. I'm okay. I want to be with God, by myself. That sounds better. But that doesn't mean I don't love people. And what I'm saying there is, so I'm not saying these things to try to convince somebody that they should stay in the church because I have the answer for the situation. I'm saying to a lot of people, don't attack us on this situation because it's more complex than we can ever understand, because it's God's when God views these things, he's going to do it on how it affects things eternally, and we can only see them things how it affects our relationship with each other. And I wanted to stand on one last thing that I do. I mean, I've done this a few times, and I'll go to a person who's black or dark brown, and I'll say, look, I feel like I can't understand this feeling that I'm having, that I can't even approach to you. And these are strangers. I do it to strangers, and they're so willing to listen because of the world and its situation right now, where you have the media who is driving this narrative that whites are oppressive and blacks are about ready to kill everybody, that you have this bad narrative all the time in your head. And it's hard for us to get along anymore in our lives, in our minds, saying these people are not a threat to me. And I'll go to a person that's dark brown. I'll say, I want to say hello to you, and I want to explain something to you, and I want to see how you feel. And these are older people, luckily, so they've seen some things in their life. And when we talk about it, they have the same understanding that I do, that this is driven by some bad ideas in the media that is creating this this distrust between the different races in our culture. And that's why we're having that we're feeling uneasy about approaching each other anymore and even saying hello, because we don't want this to be something that blows up in our face.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
So another place people can go for a pretty fair analysis of this. Fair, I love Fair, by the way. There's so much good that's done there. They're a great organization. I'm not going to say this disparagingly, but I think pushing for that idea that the Book of Mormon prophets never looked upon skin as a curse, or dark skin as a bad thing. So I like the source. Another source that's an option for people to read is Mormoner. It's MORMONR.org, Mormoner.org. And they're trying to provide a faithful, but also objective place. It's run by faithful members of the church. And you can go there and look at all the different difficult subjects in church history and current events in the church and so on, for a pretty objective fair analysis of this the issues that we deal with in the church. So you can look up racism in the Book of Mormon as one of the topics on Mormoner, and I'll just read this. The question is just asked straight up. It's pretty straightforward. Is the Book of Mormon racist? And they answer yes, in some ways. The Book of Mormon is an ancient account of competing ethnic clans over the course of about 1,000 years. Sometimes those clans' records include racist rhetoric. There are also some explicit verses in the Book of Mormon that say that God cursed Lamanites with a skin of blackness. That's the most straightforward reading, I think, in my opinion. Not the apologetic way of explaining it, saying it's just a reference to righteousness or countenance. It's pretty straightforward to me that Nephi, at least, he thought that Lamanites, his brothers, were cursed with the skin of blackness to distinguish them from him, from his lineage. So, and then it says, and another question they ask is, are prophets in the Book of Mormon racist? And the answer, this is a faithful website. They say yes, and that some of them expressed ethnocentric beliefs against different tribes using racist language. However, some of those prophets also taught against racial prejudice. So it's like they weren't, like Nephi, for example, maybe he just wasn't aware. I don't think he was aware. I don't think he had all the light that Christ has, for sure. He's not Christ. I don't think he has all the light that President Nelson has. I think President Nelson has more light knowledge that Nephi does. And that makes sense with if we're talking about a restoration that's ongoing. So I don't see that as a problem. I see it as just a beautiful thing that over time, prophets have become more enlightened through revelation, through the previous work of prophets, right? Older prophets have received amazing revelation. Those our prophets today have access to that. They don't have to gain, they don't have to have Peter's vision of the sheet coming down from heaven. That's already been done. They're way past that point. President Nelson's working with the NAACP and other amazing organizations. Interfaith work is tremendous. This is a new day, a very I'm not political, a very progressive day in the church. There's a lot of very progressive, wonderful things that the brethren are doing that are not bad, that are wonderful. And so I just have a testimony of the direction in our church that's very positive. And we may be behind the times some points in our history where 1978 was way past, a lot of the civil rights movements and things that happened and laws that were passed. Yeah, we would have been great for us to be the leaders. But like I said, it's a membrane. The church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's two parties involved. Our marriage in that, even in our title, it's the Church of Jesus Christ. It's his church, but it's also of Latter-day Saints. There's a human element. So it's a give and take. We're trying to become one with Christ. It takes time.
Yeah. Can I ask you a few questions real quick, and then we'll end this. One of the things that would be brought up, why would God want Joseph Smith to even talk about the skin of blackness, knowing that it could influence the members to look down upon people?
Yeah, so I'm not a hardcore tight translation guy. Like I used to be growing up in the church. I thought Joseph Smith used spectacles, right? And he saw every single word exactly the way that God himself. My view has been expanded on how Joseph saw the word translation and understood the word translation and how it happened. I know he dictated. That's clear from the evidence. The printer's manuscript and Oliver's, crossing things out and so on. It's Royal Skousen's work on the dictation, very clearly dictated. And he did correct Oliver sometimes on some of the names and things. So we know that there was some tight elements to the translation, but there's also some loose elements. Like there are some, I would say 19th century elements. We have some King James Bible language and even some italics and things that were put in the Book of Mormon. It's like, well, the King James Version came out clearly after Moroni died. So, how did that get in there? So I've had to expand my view of how, I mean, maybe how Joseph operated, what he saw. So I'm kind of in between a tight and a loose, idea of how, and no one knows, because Joseph only said it was by the gift and power of God. That's all he said.
Yeah.
He didn't ever say, well, I see exactly these words and I read them exactly the way. No, he doesn't say that. He just says, he just translated it by the gift and power of God. For Joseph, that was enough, and for me, it's enough. And so I see the way that, that this language. One of my ideas that I love that I've shared with some people is that God's a delegator. Okay, so Heavenly Father, he's a busy person, and he also loves to delegate. That's his
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah.
We delegate in the church. We delegate. It's a good thing for us to delegate when we have knowledge that someone else doesn't. We want them to learn, right? So we delegate positions of power. So I'm totally on board with this idea that Heavenly Father did not write down every single word for Joseph, didn't translate it for Joseph and put it on the stone, the seer stone. I'm not sold on that idea. Maybe some people are, that it had to be exactly that way. And I don't know where you get that from, because Joseph never said it, right? We don't know exactly how God gave Joseph the words, but we do know God's a delegator, and we know that some spirits, a lot of great spirits that weren't members of the church, that worked on the King James version of the Bible, and it understood ancient languages, had studied them all their lives, maybe continued to study in the spirit world, that God maybe organized a council. He likes councils.
Yeah.
So I'm all on board with this idea that God organized a council of wise and faithful and loving and good humans, men and women, probably both, I would hope, spirits in the spirit world, who then prepared a translation. Maybe Nephi got together with Alma and Mormon, especially, and Moroni, and they all kind of sat down and said, all right, who knows the language of Joseph Smith? We don't really understand that language yet.
That's an interesting concept. I've never heard that one before. And I think there's more to that. And I've had that mindset that, it's God is telling his messengers, and his messengers are telling us what we need to know, because he's navigating a lot more than we understand. And there's only been a couple of times that we really know that the Father has approached humanity at any given time. And that's Joseph Smith's time, and Stephen's seeing the Father and the Son. And then you have Paul. Well, Jesus Christ was the one that was mentioned there.
Oh, just you're talking about the Father only.
Okay. Yeah, Father.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have
not very often.
Yeah, and then you have the beginning of the world. Now, we've heard his voice a few times with Jesus Christ being baptized, or transfiguration, things like that. But again, or the Book of Mormon story where Jesus Christ is announced to the people by the voice, but never appeared. So again, he's delegating a lot, even delegated. So
that's his process.
So he's expecting those who are his messengers to, and I think that's a great concept. Another question, because I know that we don't want to over talk this, but we want to have enough information.
Yeah.
How have you navigated through this difficult subject, but not in the way that is that unties you in any way from the church, but actually you're just having to deal with it because it's a part of our history?
How do I navigate this topic and other difficult topics?
Well, I was just talking about the blacks and the racism that was happening, knowing that it's a part of our history. Does it ever come up in your mind and say, why was it there? And it becomes somewhat of a constant battle for a couple of weeks until you talk it out with somebody.
So,
or at least that's the way it was with me. So I'm
trying to. Sure, I got a good answer for this, I hope.
All right.
It's something that I struggled with. So it all comes down to this concept of the fallibility of prophets. How fallible can they be, and still, not have the amen to that priesthood of that man? Kind of, is it unrighteous dominion? Is it crossing? Is it so sinful that they have to be, their priesthood power has to be revoked, right? Taken from the earth, taken from them. Where is that line? And we don't really know. Okay, God has never said a prophet can do X, Y, and Z. We're up to this. He doesn't give us that, like, you can't cross this line. He doesn't say that because, maybe that's tempting for someone to say, I'm going to go all the way up to this line and then not cross it, and I can still be a prophet. I don't know. But he doesn't command in all things. Like, he teaches us principles, and then he allows men and women to make mistakes and to learn and to grow from those mistakes. Okay, so that's general principle. So I was struggling with this. I just didn't understand clearly the fallibility of prophets, and I was concerned with these big mistakes. I was citing on the side of, that the priesthood ban was a mistake, legitimate mistake made by Brigham that was perpetuated down. And I'm like, how could these men preach Christ, be so amazing in so many ways, but then also, teach doctrine that is not God's eternal mind and will. So anyway, so I was struggling with it, and I was praying about it, and I had this little vision. I'll say it's a vision. Okay, my mind was open, and I saw something very clear. Okay, so what I saw was a giant room that was dark. It was like a warehouse. Like, I couldn't see the ends of the warehouse. And I looked over in the darkness, and I could sense that there was all these beautiful things around me, like a celestial room with the lights turned off. That's how I describe it. And then in the darkness, I saw Joseph and Emma walking forward toward me, hand in hand. And they came towards me, and they were in the dark. And then I saw Christ approach them and come towards them and meet face to face. And he gave them each a candle and said, hey, here's a candle. Go forward and light the room. And he lit the candles, and he said, go on, go figure it out. Go find the candles and light the room. So Joseph and Emma, of course, there's a very dark room with lots of things in it. So they're going to stumble and fall and struggle. And they tried. They earnestly tried and lit some parts of the room before they died. There were some pockets of light in the room. And then Brigham and the other prophets, and so on, they got candles, and they started to light parts of the room as well. And I saw Brigham, of course, mess some things up and say some things, but also saw him do a lot of good. And then I saw the current day of the church, and I saw that there's many great and important things still to be revealed. And then God, he spoke to me, and he said, out of darkness and obscurity, I'm restoring my church. It's scriptural, DNC 1.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, okay. And then I was reminded, the Spirit like took me back in time, and I was reminded of this experience that I had when I was a young teenager. Well, I was preteen, I think. I don't know the exact age, but probably like 9, 10. I knew better. But I'd gone with some friends at a birthday party. We went down the street at a birthday party, and we were alone without parents. And this is what kids did back in the late, 80s and 90s. Okay?
Yeah.
We did. We just walked around the neighborhood and just did stuff. Okay, so that's what I was doing, and I was walking, following the crowd, and some of the kids started to pick up rocks, and we were at this big apartment complex that was being built. And then there was some brand new, huge glass windows, beautiful windows that had been installed recently. And they started throwing rocks at the building. And I picked up a rock, and I thought it was fun, and I started throwing rocks. And I broke some windows, big, beautiful windows. And we laughed and had fun, and it was cool. And I went home, and I didn't tell any of my parents. We didn't talk about it. I hid it from my parents. And I swear to you, this is what happened. A couple years later, my mom sent me and my dad out to go out for fast food. And I remember sitting in the fast food, the pickup window in the lane, getting the food, and my dad turned and looked at me, and he's like, hey, did you ever break some windows? And I was like, what? How did you know, Dad? How did you know about that? And he's like, yeah, your mom was talking with, remember your old friend, named him and said, remember, her mom was talking with your mom, and she was like, hey, do you remember when our kids broke those windows? And my mom was like, what? My little boy broke those windows? Really? What? And it just shocked her, and was sad for her that I never told her. And my dad took me out to dinner, to have a one-on-one, and then we drove over after dinner to the apartment complex that was now finished, and the owners had to replace those windows, of course. And we met with the owner, and I remember my dad pulling out the checkbook, writing a check, and saying, "Here, I hope this will pay for some of those windows. I'm sorry that happened." And I was, of course, nervous and dumb, and
Yeah.
impulsive, and all the things as a young preteen kid. And the Spirit asked me. He said, "Do you condemn yourself, a 10-year-old little boy?" And I had to think about it. I was like, "Ooh, no, I don't condemn myself," because I was naive. I was young.
Yeah.
And he said, "Do not condemn my servants. They too operate with limited light, just like you did." And so it was very important for me at that moment that I need to stop condemning past leaders of the church and say they're operating with relatively limited light. And today they have limited light compared to Christ. He has all the light. He is the light. And he's giving us more light, but we cannot look upon our leaders even today and say, condemn them, because they are still learning, still growing, and they're not perfect. So that's how I see prophets and the progression of prophets since the beginning of time. And that now I don't have any kind of worries about past mistakes. It could be something really, really bad. And all I can say is I cannot condemn them because I'm not them. God will judge. If Joseph was immoral, that's between him and God.
That's his.
That's his.
Yeah. And I love that perspective. And that was a dream that you had. Is that right? Or
yeah, it was during the day. My mind was open. I was asking for revelation, for help. And
yeah.
I saw that vision, and it was very quick. It happened
that
just
was
in a matter probably of 30 seconds or so. But I saw all of that, and I've since thought a lot about it, and I've written it down and shared it with people when the time is right.
Yeah, that is an incredible story. And believe me, I've had some things happen to me, and I'm and so I can understand where Leo. And it's kind of interesting. I want to go off on a tangent for a second, and then I'm going to come back. They talk about the fact that Joseph Smith didn't write down his the first vision for until 1838 or something like that.
1832, I think, is the first.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm thinking about my own experiences, and the only time I haven't written any of them down, and you're talking about straight up revelation with an event that takes place after I received the revelation 3 days later, or 3 months later, and we're talking, and I did some of those videos early on under the name the Oklahoma Guru, but I've had some really incredible things happen to me, but I haven't written them down. So I could see where Joseph Smith didn't write things down, because you're talking about them all the time verbally, and and because of that, you just don't feel an urge to actually write stuff down. But I wanted to ask one other question, and because we could stay on the subject for a long time. I'm not kidding you, because there's a lot involved.
Yeah.
We didn't even touch the scripture that says that he's an acceptor of all persons. We're talking about actually quoting it. I'll make sure I put that on the screen, where he is an acceptor of all persons. But what do you know about the continued slavery in Utah? And we can cut this out if you don't know anything about it.
Well, I know that we were not immediate. I know that we didn't immediately abolish slavery when we formed the territory. Right, we was voted to keep it.
Yeah, and have you seen the movie the Black Pioneers yet?
The movie is called Black Pioneers. What is it?
Black Pioneers by Mally Bonner.
Oh, it's not. It's not Black Pioneers. It's
Green Flake.
Yeah, Green Flake. Yes, I watched it. Yes.
Oh, what a wonder! And so
Green Flake was awesome.
Oh, wasn't it? And here's I want to do two things here. and one of them is the reason that I can overcome myself these problems, and believe me, I want to vomit the idea that my ancestors who were on the plains and all that, pioneers, came over to Utah, and both were slave owners and slaves themselves.
Right.
I vomit the idea that we actually were slave owners, part of my heritage.
Right.
My Chickasaw Indian culture, lineage, also they were slave owners. So it happened everywhere, and it's my, I reject that entirely. I don't like that idea, but I have to deal with it as a human being. And one of the things that I have to say, that these men and women who were slaves or were treated in such the worst way, as far as the members of the church who were darker skinned than I am, what great people these people will be exalted above all of us, because they went through the most hateful time, and yet anybody that's had to endure such vile from a group of people that are called God's people, they will be exalted upon above all of us. That we are, what we have to do, what we have to endure is the fact that we have a history that makes us feel uncomfortable. They were living the life of slaves or rejected in the church, and I'm sorry, they are the greatest, and that's what gives me strength.
Yeah.
To say, if they can endure, so can I. Who am I to?
Jane Manning James.
What's that?
Jane Manning James.
Jane Manning.
Yes.
Elijah Abel, Greenflake, and many others. And just there's a whole group of people.
They deserve our highest respect. Yes.
Yeah, highest respect. And that's why I can overcome these things, because I think about those who have triumphed through even the worst of conditions, and people such as today, Thurl Bailey, who had the awareness of that problem, but yet still overcame that. And then you have Alex Bayet, who didn't even really say that's no big deal, but he's still, in a different culture. And there's so many of those that are of that race, and even people that grew up before 1978 who were Black members of the church. They had to overcome that rejection of the priesthood in their lives, but yet they stayed the course, and they trusted what God had given them, and that was revelation that the church was true, and that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God.
That's a testament to me, a miracle to me, and
yeah,
yes, I very, very faith promoting, for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
And the other, I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. You go ahead, please.
I'm just going to say amen to what you said. That's all.
And there's the other part of that. That I want, another part is that I want to say is, my life resembles the church, and it's coming up and coming forth. It is born out of innocence, where a man absolutely was crying out, "Am I saved?" or "What does salvation look like?" Joseph Smith, he comes and he pleads with the Lord in prayer, and then the windows of heaven are opened up, and you have the Father and Son who come to him as a 14, 15-year-old boy. And I'm sorry, that's a pretty overwhelming situation. Now he feels like he's got all this power. But remember, the church comes up and it's very innocent. And then all of a sudden, just like a newborn baby, as I was, newborn, innocent. There's nothing, there's no corruption within it. And then as a child, as I grew up as a child, the corruption and the racism that I had to deal with, both becoming a part of the culture of racist, but also having that put upon me. I was becoming more and more corrupt as the church was becoming more and more corrupt. And then over time, there was a change of heart in the members, so that in my own life, where I was in a dark place, and hate and anger were always part of it. At the age of 32, there was a complete change, and then I found a new way of being a human being, and loving people, and not trying to force people to bend my will. And the church went through that same stage in 1978 there was enough people that wanted that change, that they were willing to forego everything to make it happen. And the churches had a change of heart. Absolutely had a change of heart. It's not, yeah, I'm not perfect, and neither is the church perfect. And therefore, I see that same road that I'm taking as a part of the church, that I'm still growing just as much as the church is growing in its love for for their neighbor and for God itself. So anyway, I'll give you the last word, Leo.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly how I feel. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm symbolically married to Christ, right, through my covenants. He is my leader. He is my king. He's my everything, and I worship him. And this church allows me to worship in a beautiful and powerful way. I choose this church because my experience, not only because I was raised in it, but because I've with my expanded view, I find the most beauty and power within the church, this Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I love it. I wish I could be a more faithful and better member of the church and do more good. We all struggle, and I struggle even today with all kinds of things and trying to be better. And it's just, the natural man is tough, and we're all vulnerable to being deceived and to being, attacked by Satan and by those who would wish our harm. And so it's hard for us to stay, true all the time. And I just want to share with anybody that hears this that, yeah, it's not easy. It's a difficult journey. This life is not easy. We all have lots of worries. I have a lot of worries and a lot of heartache. Even though my life compared to some probably seems very easy, but in my own sphere, my own head, my own heart, I have heavy burdens. And if it wasn't for Christ, I don't know, it would be just too much. And he has lifted so much of my burden. I still feel burdened by being a disciple. I have to carry his yoke. I'm burdened by the yoke that Christ has given me. It's a cross to bear. As a Christian, as a member of this, high demand, high expectation church. And so I understand it's not an easy thing to do, but I do find peace and joy and fulfillment walking this covenant path. And I see covenants, this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'm done, but I see covenants and ordinances as warm hugs. I see that, not checking the box. I see it as opportunities to receive warm hugs from Christ. And I have been, very warmly hugged by him in the temple. I've been hugged by Christ and embraced by him. If it's just symbolically, that's okay. But I have felt his presence, and I have felt his great love for me. And my testimony is that Christ wants us all to embrace him and to come into his warm arms and to be healed and to be happy and to rejoice in the atonement and to not be burdened by the world, by evil. And that's my direction. That's my hope for me and my family, and for everybody who's out there listening. I hope the best for everybody. And yeah, and I share that with great love.
Thank you, Leo. It was such a pleasure. What's that?
You bet. Happy to do it.
So I want to check us out here, and then I've got a question for you after I say it. So me and Leo, we're Latter-day Saints on fire, and we're out of here.